Hi everybody, this is Tana Meyer with Proverbial Homemaker. I am so glad to be here today. I know it's been quite some time since I've done a Facebook Live, and so I'm pretty excited to be here with you guys. And I know a lot of you are really looking forward to hearing more about writing strands. So I'm gonna get set up here a little bit. Sorry, I was a little late. That happens when you have a lot of kids to take care of and things to get all arranged before you get started. So we are going to be talking today about writing strands from Master Books. If you guys have any questions, feel free to chime in. This is live, and even if you're catching the replay later, you can go ahead and ask questions and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Writing strands from Master Books. I don't know if you guys have been around for a while on Proverbial Homemaker, but if you have, or in our groups, in our Homeschool Successfully Facebook group, you know that I've been talking more about Master Books this past year. We've decided to give a lot of their curriculums a try, but the one that surprised us the most this year was writing strands. I had zero plans to change our writing curriculum, and you know how that goes. Curriculum comes along and you're like, oh, I'll give it a try, I'll give it a look. And we were pretty surprised, especially me, that writing strands ended up being such an excellent fit for my homeschool, especially for my oldest son. So I'm pretty excited to be able to talk with you guys about it today. I want to make sure I have my notes here because I want to make sure I communicate. There's a lot to this program. It's a very unique program. So if you catch me looking over here, that's why I want to make sure I don't miss anything. Okay, so I want to give you some information about this curriculum because it's pretty unique. If you've been around in the homeschool community for a while, you probably have heard of writing strands, and you may be thinking of the original writing strands. It's been around since the 80s, but a couple years ago, Master Books got a hold of it and they redid it. They rewrote it. They added a lot of biblical worldview things in there and made it more user-friendly and really took the good program that it was and developed and expanded it. And so I don't have any experience with the original writing strands, and I have seen chatter online about the original one and some of the pitfalls of that, and those have been corrected in the new one. So just to keep that in mind, if you're chiming in here and you're thinking, well, I already know about that one, it may not quite be the same edition. So you might be surprised what you find in it. So our homeschool, we started out, I have kind of bounced around with writing, not really knowing what to use for our writing curriculum. I personally love writing, but when it came to teaching my kids, and especially with my oldest, so my oldest is a boy, and as with often happens with boys, he was a reluctant writer. And so I didn't want to push it. I didn't want to make things too difficult. I didn't want to squash any of the little shreds of enthusiasm and motivation he had and confidence. So we've been going pretty slow. Last year, I went to a conference and I purchased a curriculum and we got started with that. And it was fine. Like, I was happy with it. There was some tears, from my son, and some of that may have been, in terms of diligence and work ethic issues, but some of it was because he was just really frustrated with the program. When I chatted with him about it, it really boiled down to it felt unsatisfying to him, the output that he was producing, and it was a little bit monotonous. But we just kept plugging along at a slower pace, because I saw that he was making progress in his writing. So we just kept going. So then writing strands comes in, and at first I was actually reluctant to try it. I'm like, oh, we're doing okay. I have other, you know how it is when you're planning curriculum for the year. You usually have one or two subjects in mind that you're really focusing on, and the rest you're like, okay, let's not mess with it if it's working. But I was convinced to give it a try, and I'm really glad we did. So I'm going to give you a look inside in a minute. So if you have questions, let me know. So Master Books rewrote it. It is basically a writing comprehension and reading comprehension program, but it also teaches grammar and spelling in a gentle way. So it's really a very comprehensive language arts curriculum, but it's a very gentle one. So I know that a lot of people, when they use it, they might supplement it with other things, but you really could use it just on its own. when we started with it, I was thinking, well, we'll start with, writing strands for a day or a week, and then we'll go to the curriculum we were already using and go back and forth. And that I dropped pretty quick because writing strands ended up being all we really needed. Writing strands includes a week of reading and a week of writing, and then it alternates between the two. And that kind of gels really well with how we do things anyway. And so we ended up just naturally falling into using writing strands almost exclusively. We do supplement still a little bit for my oldest with some grammar and spelling curriculum that he was already doing. But once we finish that out, then we'll probably just be continuing with writing strands. So, okay, the basic structure of writing strands, like I said, is you have alternating weeks of reading and writing lessons. And I'll show you guys inside of it in a minute. But it's very flexible. So that pattern, like I said, works really well for us. So that's what we're doing. But you could, if you wanted, just do the reading strand, or you could just do the writing strand. You don't have to do both. Or you could even, if you're trying to truck through it for the year, or if you want to get through it faster, if your child is more advanced, you could probably do a week, just take 1 week and do both a week of writing and reading at the same time. If you wanted to double those up, you could do that if you want. It's pretty flexible like that, which I like because I'm always tweaking things. So the way it works is they have a beginning 1 and a beginning 2, an intermediate 1 and an intermediate 2, and an advanced 1 and advanced 2. So they have 6 levels. And we started with beginning 2. So for each book sort of focuses on a different area of literary concept. So like the beginning 1, it focused on characters. Beginning 2, it focused on setting. And that's not all it talks about, but it kind of gives it a theme and a little bit more coherence to it, I guess, so that it's a little bit easier to follow. So the one we started on was beginning 2. And so if you go to the website, I will leave you a link for the Writing Strands portion of Masterbook's website. But if you go there, there's a placement test that you're definitely want to take if you want to try out writing strands or see where you might fall. Writing strands is recommended on the website. It's recommended for ages or grades 5 and up. So my son is in grade 5 and we're on beginning 2, and it's a perfect fit for him. I think he could have, if he was in the 4th grade, he could have probably started with beginning 1. And if you look in their books, I was just flipping through the introduction in the beginning 2 book. It does say that particular book could be from grades 3, starting for grades 3 through like 6, I think it said. So it just kind of depends on your kid and what works best for them, but definitely take the placement test. Okay. So we started with beginning 2, and that one is focusing more on setting. And then the other piece is it comes with, you might have seen it when I held it up earlier. It comes with this teaching companion, Writing Strands Teaching Companion. It's this little book. I highly recommend this book. When we first got this set, I did not read that book because that's kind of how I roll. I'm like, I don't want to read that book. I'm just going to go ahead and start. And you know what? That worked fine for us for quite a while. And then I realized, okay, I'm missing some things here. What am I missing? I would read it and I'd be like, this doesn't quite make sense. I don't understand how to do this. And I'm like, oh, right. That's what the teacher guide is for. So I would skim through the teacher guide, because that's what I do. I skim through things. I found the piece that I needed and then I moved on. So since then, I have taken the time to go back and slow down and get a cup of coffee and read through it. And now I know how much is in that teacher guide. So I really do recommend trying to make the time and be a little bit more planning ahead than I was and read it ahead of time. But even if you don't and you just want to jump right in, definitely get it. You can get it as a PDF if you want, or you can get the physical copy, but I've been marking up the physical copy, so that's been working really well for me. All right, I'm going to go ahead and show you inside of Writing Strands. And I know it's probably going to be backwards for you, but the display, but you'll get the idea. So there's a few things that are just unique to Masterbooks and how they set up their curriculum that I know a lot of people appreciate that I wanted to show you. So there's some introduction. So I'm looking at Writing Strands, beginning 2. If you go to the beginning of the book and kind of read through the introduction, it gives you a really good sense of what this book will cover and some really basic teaching tips and tools for both the writing and the reading portion. If you go to their website, and again, I'll leave you the link to their Writing Strands, it gives you this really brief intro into each book that helps you to see what it all covers. It actually covers quite a bit. All right, so the first thing is they have this weekly skills mastery chart, weekly skills writing mastery chart. So if you're trying to teach your child certain skills and you want to make sure that they've mastered them, then you can go through here. And so I don't check things off. So you're getting to know a lot about me and my personality. I don't like checking things off. I don't like doing what people tell me to do. But this is still really useful to me. I just don't use it in the way that it is probably intended. I just scan through it, every so often and think, okay, is my child actually getting a good handle on these concepts through these lessons? And if he's not, I know that we can go back and read through them a little bit more. So like this one is like writing an organized paragraph. That is one of the objectives of week 3 and 5, which is about sentence and paragraph control. And it's a basic skill area. Just got a phone call. These are really good gauges for me as his teacher to be able to know how he's doing without having any, it's not rigid. It's a really good guide. It just gives me a good sense and a good feel of how he's doing and if he's progressing well. One thing I want to mention that I really like is that at the beginning, it starts incredibly gentle. Like when we started, I was like, this is really simplistic, but it's kind of nice that it starts that way. And then it slowly and gradually builds up. And it was just what he needed. He was never overwhelmed by it at all. He would never felt like he didn't understand what was happening. It was very gentle. And then at the beginning, with those really simple lessons, it focused on getting them to pay attention and to follow the instructions precisely, which, that can be a struggle to teach in itself. So in that way, it helped with his, paying attention and being diligent and precise and pursuing excellence in his writing, not just slapping it out to get it done. Because as you go, if he doesn't, one of the teaching tips is as you go, if he's not following the instructions, then he needs to go back and reread them and follow them more clearly or more precisely. So anyway, there's that. They have a spelling list. So the way they handle spelling is as you're going through the lessons, if there's a spelling, if there's a word that they're constantly misspelling or that you think is pretty basic and they should know, you would write it down here. I actually just write mine on my phone so I can have it everywhere with me. But you can write them down here. That is something that we already were doing as our main sort of spelling approach. And so that was a really good fit for us. And it really does work. Like we don't have to go through spelling exercises where he already knows it. We can just focus on the things he doesn't know. And in the teaching guide, it gives you more guidance on the rules and things that you can use, some basic rules, not like a comprehensive list of all the rules, but some basic rules that you can use as you're teaching them about those spelling rules. Here's like a list of problems to solve. Again, I don't use it, but it's there if you want it. So as you're going, if you see that they're having a persistent problem with some area, you can write it down here so you don't forget it. I tend to write a lot of things on my notes file in my phone. And then this is something that's a really cool feature. This is a suggested daily schedule. So it has day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5 for each week. And then it tells you exactly what to read or exactly what to accomplish. If you're like me and you don't like checklists, you can totally ignore this and it's fine. It's laid out the way I like it, so you can just do the next thing. You can just pick up the book, go where you left off, and do the next lesson, and you're totally fine. If you prefer to have a checklist or if you need it for records or whatever, this is a really handy thing to have on hand. Okay. So then it goes into the lessons, but I want to flip to the back real quick and just show you what's back there, because I never flipped to the back and I missed this for a while. And then when I realized it was there, it was really handy. So they have helpful terms in the back. So if you're talking about an apostrophe and you want to have some definitions and some examples and all those things, or if you realize they're having trouble with apostrophes, you can go to the back and find that kind of information there, and it will give you good teaching tips and things like that. And then there's an answer key. The answer key is a little light, probably because a lot of the lessons they really engage in a lot of critical thinking and literary analysis and things like that. This is not, so I've been asked, is this an independent curriculum? I think it can be, but I wouldn't expect it right out of the gate. What happened with us is we started the curriculum, and it was a lot of us sitting down and working through it together and figuring out how it worked. There was a learning curve. It had to do with the fact that it just wasn't, it was open and go, as in I had no preparation time. I didn't have to prepare anything for every lesson. We could just open it and do the next lesson. But, there are ideas in there, like what is the worldview of the author, and how do Bible principles apply in this situation, things like that, where you can't just, unless your child is used to thinking in those terms and used to the way that this book asks the questions, used to writing out their thoughts in that way, you're going to be sitting down with them and working through them. And I'm going to tell you, so I'm a busy mom. I have 6 kids and homeschool, and I have a home business and all this stuff. And so I tend to go for curriculum that is easy, is very light on prep work, and that is not teacher intensive. But there are certain things where I believe that teacher intensive, as far as me being fully engaged in his lessons, is really important. And I think literature and writing is one of those areas. So I think it is totally worth it. So don't let that part scare you off. But you do need to carve out the time. You can't just... I would not suggest trying to pick it up and handing it to your child and say, here you go, do your next lesson. You're going to want to sit down and read through each lesson and help them work through these hard concepts. Now, after I think we're about halfway through the book, my son is able to do a lot of it on his own. And then we read through it together at the beginning, and then he goes off and does things on his own. And then he comes back and we discuss, and then he goes off and does some more. And it kind of works like that, a lot like our other independent curriculum works, but it took a little while to get there. And there are still lessons where we work through it together. But the conversations we're having are amazing. The way we're connecting with each other and with the literature and with the ideas and concepts that this curriculum is helping us explore are priceless, in my opinion. So I definitely recommend that portion of it, and you'll get an idea of that in a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to show you one of the lessons here. Okay, so this is lesson 6. So I guess we're not quite. Okay, so this is lesson 6. Lesson 6 is reading, or writing, because like I said, it goes writing and then reading and then writing and reading each week. So for this week is the writing lesson. So here's day 51. So you can match it up to the that chart that I showed you. We're going to be talking about point of view. So this is sort of the lesson text, and we read through this together. Sometimes I have my son read it. Sometimes I read it to him. We talk about the objectives. These are where you're going to find your teaching points, and often we'll be sitting there talking, and I'll elaborate on some things, or he'll talk through his questions. So like in this lesson, it's saying, when you write fiction, it can be fun to tell your readers what the people in your stories are thinking. This means that instead of telling your stories or telling your readers just what happens, you can tell how the characters feel and what they want. And it explains to them how to work those kind of ideas into their writing. And it gives them some examples. And then over here, it gives them the objectives. I think I already mentioned that. So it goes back to this page with more examples. And then over here, it says you will write a short piece about some person who plays practical jokes and then gets caught by others. And then it talks about how you're going to eventually do not tell your teachers or do not tell your reader what the characters are thinking. And then, it says, if you can't think of a practical joke, that's fine. Just tell about something that a person does that's not a good thing to do. If the person and the person gets caught at it, it does not have to be a joke. So my son likes this because he'll write down his, rough draft of a story that comes to mind. It gives him an idea to go on. It's not just, here, go write about this. And it gives him an out if he can't think of something that precisely fits what they're suggesting. And that is quite a bit of writing for him compared to what it used to be. When he started, a couple, sentences was a challenge. But because of the gentle way it started, when it started with phrases, and even words. And then he was building on those phrases and words and building sentences and pretty soon building paragraphs. So now he's able to just jump in and write a short story right off the bat like this. But at the beginning, it starts very gentle. So they really do work up to that. And now he does not have tears over that. So he does that for day 1. And then over here is the next day. And it says we're going to talk about how the practical joker tells others how they're feeling. So it gives you some hints. You can see here, it gives you some hints that are, grammar or spelling related. This one says commas go inside quote marks. So you can have that conversation with your kid then. Or over here, quotations start with capitals. So that's kind of how they sort of naturally work in the other kinds of lessons, language arts lessons, into these writing assignments. So you talk through this, and then he rewrites that story, incorporating new aspects. In this case, he's incorporating verbiage that tells the reader how the character's feeling without just directly telling how the character's feeling. But that gives him a good place to start. And then the last day of the week is a progress report. So most of these I think all of these are exactly the same in every lesson. We mostly do these orally because he's done a lot of writing, and so I don't really think we need to do this in written, but you could. So you could have him do this independently. So it's like, this is the best sentence I wrote this week. I think it's the best because I made this mistake this week, and this is what I learned to help me avoid making it again. This is a sentence showing how I fixed the mistake, and then some comments. So sometimes he won't answer all of them, we'll talk through it, and sometimes he doesn't have an answer for all of them, and that's okay. Sometimes he does. Sometimes he just jumps ahead and writes them in. Sometimes we do it orally. So we're pretty flexible on that. That's the writing week. And then the next week is the reading week. So in the next week, we're talking about setting and characters for the reading assignment. And the very first thing that happens is it says, go find, your teacher's going to assign you a book. So go read the book and then discuss it with your teacher. And it has a little bit of information here that they can read before they jump into their reading assignment. And it has the objectives over here. So the way this works is during the reading portion, you have 2 pieces of literature you're evaluating. The first one is the Bible. Every single week, you're going to be reading and discussing and evaluating the Bible. The second piece is a picture book or a chapter book that you have on hand, that you have from the library, that you found on some great book list or whatever. That book is going to be their assigned reading. And they're supposed to finish that reading. So that's what this first page I just showed you is your teacher's going to assign you a book. I'm going to assign him a book and say, read this by the end of the week, because then we're going to have these discussion and you're going to do some writing about it. So to begin with, what I started with, my son's in the 5th grade. But what we did was we pulled out some of our favorite picture books because they're short. They're things that he could do quickly. So he'd read it this first day and then he'd go quickly reread it again before we did the writing portion on that book. And that way it was fresh in his mind and it was something that was easy and more manageable for him. And we still do that. We'll still pull out picture books and he'll read those. And then the other thing you could do is if they're voracious readers or if they're already reading something, you can give them a chapter book. You can give them a simple chapter book or just even select a portion of a book and say, these are the pages or the chapters I want you to read. So it's not like you're handing them a big Horkin novel and saying, go read this and we're going to, write a report at the end of the week. Maybe that's what happens by the end of the full program when you get into high school. But right at this stage, you can keep it easy and that's totally okay. Especially when you're starting and you're learning together how to have these really good discussions about things like setting and characters and worldview and flow of the story and everything. So you hand him a book. He goes off and read that. The next piece is, because theoretically they're reading that for the week, is that you're going to go and do the Bible passage. So in this lesson, you have, we're discussing Judges chapter 6, verse 1 through 27. So my son and I, we will sit down and we'll read this together and we'll read it out loud. And he will be going back and reading it again on his own. That's something that he needs to do and that's good for him anyway. But the first thing you do is it says, step 1, pray for the Lord's wisdom and inspiration in your reading. And there have been times when we've been tempted to skip that, but we are pretty diligent in actually praying through that together each time. And I just love that that's in there, that we can sit there and pray together for God's wisdom before we read this book. That's so important to us, and for wisdom and inspiration and how we're handling it with honor. So step 2, Determine the genre of the literature: history, poetry, prophecy, proverbs, letters, parables, etc. And there are some tips in the back and in the teaching companion that talk about why this is important. And if you go to their Moms of Master Books group, which is I like that group a lot. If you go into their files, you'll see that they have some little printable things that you can print off to help you with this if you're struggling with that particular question. And so we don't just write it down, we discuss why that's important. And for a lot of these, they're all in the same, you'll be reading through several lessons that are in Genesis, for example. And so you already have an idea of what it is. So it's just them writing in again what it, that it's historical and that it's a book of the law, for example. And then step 3, read each passage, keeping in mind the culture and historical setting of the text. And it mentions that that's often found in the introductory material to the book of the Bible. And then my clarification, because some of these questions are not written particularly well, in my opinion, but they're not hard to overcome. I think what happens is, when we first read through it, we were really, we were kind of confused. We're like, well, what do we do with this? And then I realized all we really need to do is figure out what is it trying to get, what is it getting at? And then just tweak how we're thinking about that question or modify it on our own. And I think that they have plans for future releases to modify these questions, but I would go ahead and use this curriculum now, and that's not really a hindrance to me. So the way we modify this question is we're not just reading its passages, keeping these things in mind, but we're going to have a discussion or write down why is the cultural historical context that we know about important to this particular passage and what we're reading. And a lot of times we'll come back to this question a little bit later after we've discussed the meaning. And then here's step 4 is look for the intended meaning. Basically, what is the point we're supposed to get out of the story? What are we trying to learn from, what is God teaching us through this? What is the meaning of it? What is the Bible saying? Not how we feel about it. What is the Bible saying? And then step 5, seek to find that life application. Why is this important to us today, and how can we apply it? And then step 6, seek other passages to help define the meaning. Scripture interprets Scripture. Amen to that. So the way I approach that, different people approach that differently. The way we approach that is we will discuss a lot of times after we read through a Bible passage, my son will already have ideas about other Bible stories that he read or other scriptures that he has learned that remind him of what we just read. And so we'll talk through those. Sometimes we'll write them down. If he doesn't have anything to go on, I'll give him some certain passages or Bible stories that I know of, and we'll go look them up together. Or what we've been doing when we're just not really sure is we do a word study. So we go back to the scripture, we find the words that to us convey the meaning of the passage. Maybe we're looking up a word that's talking about righteousness, for example. So we might go pick the word righteousness and we'll go do a word study together. We'll go online, we'll look in a concordance, we'll look up in our dictionary, what does the word righteousness mean? We'll talk about it. Sometimes we'll write that information down in there, and we'll find other passages that relate to it. So that is how we've been approaching that piece. And this page right here is where the most rich discussions are coming for my son and I. We are learning a lot together. And I'm learning a lot about how he thinks and helping him to connect the dots from different Bible principles and stories. So I really value that a lot. Okay, and then the next day is read and discuss with your teacher. These are more questions that they provide about the Bible passage. So these over here, the ones I just showed you where it's like, what's the genre, etc., what's the intended meaning? These are the same questions every week. So you're going through the same process for every Bible passage you read. And at first I was like, really? We're doing the same questions every time? But it's good. It's a perfect fit because those are important questions, and they give him a good sense of what to expect. And we're able to get through it at a reasonable pace and still learn a lot at the same time. And then this page has some different things that are specific to the passage. So it talks about the setting, where is it set, and when is it set? Why is the setting important to the story? I think these are mostly the same for all of them. Does the setting change? And then these are specific to the story. So this one says, how does setting affect the story of Gideon? How does Gideon affect his setting? What does that tell us about Gideon? So those are the kinds of questions and discussions you can expect from that portion of the reading. And then here you have the next day is pretend you're Gideon, write a paragraph describing one scene from the passage this week. Be sure to include some details about the setting as well as a story of what happened. Be sure you add your own thoughts to the story. So then he's doing a simple writing assignment. Now, there are times when we're doing other things because we do the writing one week and then the reading the next week. And so on the days that we're doing our reading assignments, I tend to do other writing things like notebooking and stuff for other subjects more heavily on those weeks. So sometimes we'll skip that one or just discuss it instead. And sometimes he's really inspired by those prompts and he'll do those himself. Okay, and then the next day, the last day, is you go back to that book that you assign them to read and you have a similar discussion. So here's that assigned book. Step 1, analyze the writer's worldview or belief system. And we'll basically just, I think at first my son got tripped up on the idea of figuring out what the writer's worldview was. And sometimes that was obvious and sometimes it wasn't. So if it's not obvious, we just have a conversation about if there are any elements to the story or any words that are used or any patterns that we can see that convey a worldview or convey what the writer or the characters of the story think is important. And sometimes we don't catch anything that really fits that answer or it fits that question, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be answered every single time. Determine the genre of the literature, read the book, keeping in mind the main setting and text and primary roles of each character, and we talk about why those are important to the story. Look for the flow of the story in the book, basically what happens, what are the main events, and how do they all flow together. And then here's that question again, seek other texts to help better understand the story and its possible meaning. I think that that was challenging for us at first, and then I realized this is a perfect opportunity to go back to the scripture. So we do the exact same thing that we do with our Bible lesson from the earlier in that week. Here, we do a word study on that book. So let's say, like, one of the favorite books that we read was Days of Wonder by Robert McCloskey. So we read that together, and then we discussed the meaning and everything, discussed the worldview and all of these things and the flow of the story. And then we thought, okay, what Bible passages does it remind us of? What Bible stories, what Bible characters, what seems to be important to this author, what words keep popping up, and we would pick one of those words and we would go look that up in the Bible. We would look it up in the Bible, we'd look it up in a concordance, we'd see where it shows up in scripture, and that really has been really helpful for us. So that's what we do. That is basically the curriculum. I just showed you a week of writing, a week of reading, and how we sort of tweak it for our uses. We really enjoy this curriculum. And I'm going to show you the Writing Strands Teaching Companion one more time because I think that it is pretty awesome. So, especially if you read it. So, I would recommend getting this and having it on hand. I actually ended up with a physical copy and one on my phone, which is handy for me, so that if I don't want to get out of my seat and go get the book, then I have it there. So it has really good, actually I'm not sure there's much to show you, but I'll tell you. There are really good tips in here that you're going to want to follow that I wish I would have read before and kept to. For example, I think a lot of the success of this curriculum is that my son always feels like every single lesson is successful. Every single lesson builds on his confidence, builds on his motivation and his encouragement to keep going and keep doing the next lesson. And part of that, I think, is because of the teaching tips from the teaching manual and from the beginning introduction of the beginning 2 book that talk about how to keep it positive and light and encouraging. So for example, when my son would bring me his paper, his rough draft, I would correct everything. I would correct the spelling and the grammar and everything, and he would feel discouraged. And I might say, good job, buddy, and now I'll correct all this stuff. And so the way this teaches is it gives you a bigger perspective. It says, you have several years to work on this with your kid. If every week you just focus on, you get the paper and the first time you see it, you talk about all the things that went right. Talk about the big picture ideas that he got. Find the positive things, encourage him, support him, notice the things that he improved on, whatever. And then maybe pick one writing element that you can focus on that week to correct them. Maybe it's the apostrophes like we were talking about. Maybe you can just say, by the way, this is where the apostrophe should go, not over here. So next, when you write your next draft, make sure you correct that. And you sort of build this habit in slowly, and it's a much more encouraging experience for them. So little things like that have really been helpful for how we teach him, and making sure, like I said, that we keep it upbeat and we make him feel like every single writing assignment was a success. That, coupled with the fact that he really enjoys the topics, like he got to write a short story about his friend and why he likes his friend and all the things about his friend he enjoys and some quirky things about his friend. He really likes that. So, and then if we notice something in his writing that needs help, then I can just refer to this book and find that section, and it gives me the ideas and the confidence I need to be able to go teach that to my child. So that is Writing Strands. We are fans. We went ahead and switched. I'm really happy with it. Like any curriculum, it's not perfect. I've mentioned a few things. I think that when people start using it, they might feel a little overwhelmed with how much teacher involvement is involved, but that does get better over time as both you and your student get used to how it flows and how it works and how to answer those questions and everything, and you sort of get a routine set up for how to handle the lessons. And then the other thing, the only really issue that I had with it was how some of the questions were written, but it just took me a little bit of time of thinking through what they were trying to get at and what I wanted my child to understand, and so we just tweaked it a little bit. And that seems to be working really beautifully for us. So let me know if you have any questions. Oh, I wanted to mention that you can use the coupon code TAUNASFRIEND, all upper caps, TAUNAS, friend. And you can use that as a code if you go to Masterbooks for any order. And that will give you just a few extra bucks, 5% off on any order in the future. And let me know if you have any questions. I'm going to go ahead and leave the links in the comments and edit the post to show the links. And thank you so much for joining me.